Welcome to the Purple and Bold podcast from DNR Media. I'm Shane Metlin here with Catie Harper. We're your JMU beat writers from the Daily News Record, and we've got plenty to talk about today as we're going to preview the Sun Belt Conference Football Championship game here in Harrisonburg Friday evening on ESPN. There still actually is a game we got to talk about. Like, it seems like there's everything else dominating the headlines and the news and everything besides this actual championship game. We're going to talk about that, the matchup with Troy, the playoff implications of that. We're obviously also going to get to later in the show the coaching carousel news as it appears JMU is well underway in their search for a new head football coach, even though it hasn't been officially announced that they're on the market for a head football coach. So that's an interesting wrinkle in all of this that is kind of new to this new era of college football and college sports in general. But before we get into the JMU Troy matchup, we'll just quickly mention the JMU men's and women's basketball teams continue their seasons. They both picked up wins Wednesday night. The Duke's men's team at home against NC Central, a little bit shaky at times, but ended up pulling it out late. Some big plays down the stretch by Cliff Davis, who's kind of emerging as a go-to guy for the Dukes, along with Justin McBride, Bradley Douglas, as kind of the rotation for the men's team takes shape. And the JMU women's team continues to roll, winning their fourth straight, going down to ECU, getting back into the mid-major side of things after 3 straight wins against Virginia Tech, Boston College, and Wisconsin. So the JMU women are rolling and want to keep that going. Both those teams play this weekend after the conference championship game. We'll get way more into basketball here in the coming weeks. Football is the big topic in Harrisonburg, whether it be the game itself or the coaching search that we mentioned. Catie, we got to preview the actual matchup as Troy, I'm guessing probably in town now because their coach is in town. We're going to be talking to him in a couple hours here for press conference ahead of the Sun Belt Championship game. JMU is a big favorite by the betting lines coming out of Las Vegas and the casinos and the sports books, everything else. Does that make sense to you to see JMU listed as, a 3-touchdown favorite in a conference championship game? That in itself, I think, is pretty rare to have a team be favored by that much in what should be the two best teams in the conference, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily too much of a surprise that JMU is favored in this game. One, it's being played in Harrisonburg, and JMU usually plays really well when it's at home. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit different. It's technically a neutral site game, so you're not going to see maybe some of the same video board messages that you would see during a typical JMU home game. But Troy has struggled at times this year, and a lot of it can go back to losing its quarterback for a good chunk of the season in Goose Crowder. He's back, though. He's been back since the ODU game, which for anyone who may have watched that still wasn't necessarily a great outing for Troy. The Trojans lost 33-0 to Old Dominion, which if you want to throw in the transitive property, that's a team that JMU beat pretty calmly and handedly. So I think it does make sense that this is maybe a game that on paper looks like it should go in favor of the Dukes and probably swing that way quite a bit. Statistic-wise too, JMU's at the top of the conference pretty much in multiple categories, both on the offensive and defensive side of the ball, while Troy kind of sits in the middle of some of these categories. There are areas that Troy has struggled with. Their run game has kind of their run defense has taken a step back since conference play started. And that's an area where JMU plays very, very good football between Wayne Knight, Joby Mallory coming on late, Alonzo Barnett and his contributions, and specifically on the run game. That is something that, Troy's head coach, Jared Parker, said has probably kept him up at night a little bit, especially when it comes to Alonzo Barnett and his ability to make people miss and get away from any kind of pressure that may come his way.
Yeah, I think looking at that run game, that is something that really seems to be in JMU's favor on both sides of the ball. And you got to wonder if that's going to be like even a bigger deal as we're expecting cold, very cold weather like throughout the day, possibly snow here in the Valley in the hours leading up to the game. I don't know if it's supposed to be snowing in the evening for the actual game time, but when the weather's like that, you got to think teams maybe want to rely on the run, maybe even more than they would otherwise. And that's definitely a strength of JMU on both sides of the ball, not necessarily the biggest strength of Troy's, like you said. That would seem to play in JMU's favor as the weather could be a factor tomorrow.
It absolutely could be, and it's something that JMU has had the benefit of practicing in this week. I was out at practice on Tuesday. It was cold, it was raining, and it was not quite enjoyable for media members. However, the team itself seemed to really have some fun out in the rain. But the weather, if it does force them to maybe look at the ground game a little bit more, that is kind of where JMU has excelled this season. In terms of its run defense, there maybe is a little bit of a question mark. It's Emmanuel Bush was listed on the availability report as questionable yesterday, and that is a guy that you would really prefer to have on your defensive line playing at tackle, but that's maybe a wait and see and kind of who can step up in his place. I know, Michael McMullen has played really well. Terry Lockett Jr. has had to play this season. So there maybe isn't a massive concern if Emmanuel Bush can't go. They did play a good chunk of last week's game without him as well. So that is maybe one area that Troy could possibly look to take advantage of if he's unable to go tomorrow.
Yeah, I know in some of the press conference here in the recent weeks, there's been discussion about just how deep the defensive line has been. I think having Emmanuel Bush, just his sheer size and able to like plug in, he's always been a guy who's never necessarily going to have the huge statistics, but his presence is felt whenever he's on the field, and being able to kind of rotate him, Andrew Taddeo, both of those guys, take up some space in the middle of that field. Being able to rotate those guys has been a huge positive for JMU, like really throughout the season.
Yeah, and I think the defensive line was maybe one of those areas that people were concerned about heading into the year, and rightfully so, just with kind of who was lost and who wasn't coming back. But they have been very, very sound. Andrew Taddeo has made that jump from the FCS to the FBS very well, like you mentioned with him. And I think that group, even without Emmanuel Bush, is still a very, very talented defensive line. And I think that's where you see the advantages of Chesney and his staff really liking that rotation of players and using multiple guys throughout a game.
Yeah. You talked a little bit about Troy's quarterback situation earlier. They are similar to JMU in the fact that, they have a very capable backup, Tucker Kilcrease, who had to come in and do some stuff. I do wonder, fair is fair. Like we've talked a lot about Alonzo Barnett and him kind of recovering from the injury earlier. And now we're really kind of seeing like the real one with him, the real version of Alonzo Barnett. Tucker Kilcrease, I think to be fair, like he had a really good outing this past week against Southern Miss to really get them into this championship game. Do you think he's getting better week to week as he recovers from his injury that kept him out for a good chunk of the season?
Do you mean Goose Crowder?
Goose Crowder, yes.
Okay, I was like, wait, yeah. Crowder has started to look better. I was a little confused there for a second, but
just saying that they had a capable backup in but Goose Crowder has been back and playing pretty well.
Was lost there. Goose Crowder has, I think I put it in my game preview that's going to come out here shortly. He has started to play a lot better as, he's kind of come back from his shoulder clavicle injury. Like you said, he played well against Southern Miss. He threw an interception, which was his 5th on the season, but overall, he still was able to do what that team needed him to do in order to get to this point and to get into the Sun Belt Championship game. I think he's a very talented quarterback. There's a reason he was their starter. I think you saw them struggle without him at times. Obviously, they had that ODU loss, but they also were without him when they lost to Arkansas State. He was injured in the game against Memphis, which was another game that they lost. So to have him back and kind of finding his footing and his comfort again now that he's had a few games under his belt, he's been back for about a month now. I think that Troy is probably getting the best version of Goose Crowder.
Yeah, and the other similarity I see between JMU and Troy is that both those teams spread the ball around to various receivers. I think maybe JMU even more so than Troy, but you look at it, they've got a lot of guys with multiple catches, and nobody who necessarily truly stands out as their go-to wide receiver, but they spread the ball around, which I think can put a little bit of a challenge on your secondary or your entire defense. But and that's another similarity between JMU and Troy. Like that kind of jumps out just when you start looking at the numbers.
Yeah, they really do spread it around. And I think one area where maybe JMU kind of has this edge right now is that when we talk to a lot of the guys and talk to defensive coordinator Colin Hitchler this week, they kind of compared them to Washington State's offense, where they're very tough and they're very physical. And so I think JMU kind of has that benefit of, they're only a few weeks removed from seeing kind of that physicality that Washington State brought. So it's still familiar to them, and they can kind of pull from that when it comes to trying to find the ways to defend against this offense. Like you said, likes to spread the ball around. So I think right now JMU has that benefit of just being a few weeks out from Washington State and kind of understanding the physicality that is needed to go into a game like this.
Yeah. What else stands out to you about Troy? I know you've dove very deep into them. And anybody else that we haven't mentioned that you think is going to be a key player in this one for either team, but who kind of can really swing the matchup?
Well, I think one thing that really stands out to me about Troy is if you split it or flip it to the other side of the ball is they're very, very good at red zone defense. And that's something that Dean Kennedy talked about this week as well, is they're not giving up a lot of points once teams get down into the red zone. I think they're about the second ranked red zone defense in the conference. So JMU in its part has done well in the red zone at times this year. So JMU needs to make sure that it's finding when it gets down into that area of the field that it's getting points in the end zone and not just relying on Morgan Suarez and his abilities to kick field goals. But if it does come down to that, I think they're hitting this point in this game at the right time when it comes to Morgan Suarez. He seems to have quite a bit of confidence when it comes to his field goals after, a shaky performance at Marshall. He has really turned it around, and he has, gone back-to-back weeks setting new career highs. He hit from 45 against Washington State and then upped that at Coastal Carolina that week when he hit from 47. So I do think that is an advantage for them right now, is that he's kind of found his game. But I think for JMU, they're going to want to rely on maybe a Joby Mallory when they get down into the red zone. He has really started to come into his own running the ball over the last couple of weeks. And I think a lot of teams have put their focus on Wayne Knight, but if JMU can get into the red zone, having that kind of big running back that can run over some guys is going to be very beneficial for them. And that also maybe could include Jordan Fuller. He's listed as questionable on the availability report, but having those kind of guys that can run through some defenders is going to be beneficial to JMU. And that said, Wayne Knight can do that too. I mean, he's only 5'7", but he has shown time and time again that he can, evade the tackles and get through some guys. So I think that run game is really going to be important for JMU, especially down in the red zone.
Yeah, and I think we talked about the weather. When it gets cold like that, you almost see you almost see the sport like just move between the tackles like even more. To have those two guys, Joby Mallory, maybe Jordan Fuller, who can really do that. And Wayne Knight runs up the middle a lot too. Like he gets to the second level and then it's goodbye. But like it's not like he's a guy that has to take it around the end to get yards.
And that was actually something Bob Chesney talked about after the Coastal game in the post-game press conference, was that it wasn't the easiest day for Wayne Knight running the ball. It was a very hard game. He was getting hit kind of early. Like the contact was not coming kind of further away like he's used to, but he handled it when he needed to. And obviously, the game breaks away at the end. Joby Mallory ends up being the leading rusher with a couple long runs. But Bob Chesney was very impressed with how Wayne Knight handled that physicality from Coastal Carolina's defensive front. So I think that also came at a good time for him, where he is probably going to face it again this weekend, especially if they get down into the red zone. But I think he kind of understands that and how to handle it coming off of last week's game and how he adjusted in the game.
Yeah. Beyond the actual matchup, I'm just looking forward to kind of seeing the atmosphere here. the weather and everything else, it reminds me a little bit of just a few years ago, like the last FCS playoff run. They hosted Montana here, very similar weather. I know there's been multiple times. Like I think the famous Weber State game was also very cold. I think
Honestly, both Weber State games.
maybe seems like there was a Villanova game maybe where the weather was like this. I think we're going to see an even bigger crowd than what they typically got for FCS playoffs, which, if you're talking about why you made the move to do this, you get this kind of game in December at home and looking like not a ton of tickets left. I mean, and the ones that last time I looked at were left, it was like, a few here, a few there, not large sections that were available other than maybe like the top corners.
Yeah, I've even tried to convince my parents to come down for the game just to see me mainly. But I told my dad, I was like, "Hey, Tennessee's not playing in the SEC championship. You can be here." But I mean, I think some of these games, I think the environment is going to be really cool and really fun. Um, some of the games that I've been to at JMU, some of the most memorable ones, whether it was covering the team or just being in the stands, have been these Friday night games. Like you mentioned, the infamous Weber State one where Ethan Racky hit the walk-off field goal. That was an absurd environment. It was so cold. They played Sam Houston State on a Friday night, and it was really cold. I can't remember which game was colder. One was like 2016 and one was 2017. Weber State in 2019. I remember covering that game and it was snowing. Like there have been some really, really fun Friday night games. And I think that environment seems to be, like you said, tracking in that direction again. I know talking with Kevin Warner at JMU, they've sold out general admission and student tickets. So that is a very exciting mark, I'm assuming, for the program. But then, he even said to me that they are required to give up to 3,000 tickets to the visiting team if that is what they request. He said that they didn't even request anything close to that mark. So it seems like a lot of tickets are being sold to JMU fans. So I think it's going to make a good quote unquote home environment for JMU, even though it's technically that neutral site like we talked about earlier.
Yeah, and JMU fans should be fairly used to that. Like that, it was the same thing for the FCS playoff games, where you got a mixture of different videos, and the conference or the NCAA plays their own things. You see it when they've hosted NCAA lacrosse events, when they've had it's been a while, but regionals in softball or conference championships in other sports. So it's nothing new. Like I seen a lot of talk about that this week, but like. I don't think it's going to be something that like is really like jumps out to people that much if you've been to other postseason events at JMU.
Yeah, and I saw some people that were maybe a little worried that it was, like an FCS playoff crowd, because they were like, "Oh, that's not good." I'm like, I remember the FCS playoff crowds being really loud and really kind of good environment. So I don't know. I think it's setting up to be a really, really fun Friday night, regardless of, if you're a Troy fan coming in to town or if you're a JMU fan. I think it should be a really, really good night of football. And then even if you think about it on like the national stage, it's going to be an ESPN game. There aren't a ton of football games really going on tomorrow night. So it's going to bring a lot of attention to JMU, which is, I think, something that the Sun Belt, and it's not even just going to bring attention to JMU, it's going to bring attention to the Sun Belt. And I think that's something that the league is probably very excited for.
Yeah, and we haven't even really touched on the stakes in this one. For one thing, obviously, it's JMU going for their first Sun Belt championship, which means a lot to a lot of people because they weren't eligible for those 2 years when they felt like they had a really good shot to win them, and then missed out on it last year. They just weren't really they weren't the top team in the division last year, but they jumped back up to what I think JMU fans might call their rightful spot at the top of the Sun Belt East and get a chance for a conference championship game, which possibly could put them in the college football playoff, which is just nuts to think about. We're going to have to watch some scores. I don't know that the AAC game, which starts an hour after JMU's game tomorrow night, will make a ton of difference to JMU's fortunes. But Saturday, Duke versus Virginia in the ACC championship game, should Duke win, there's a real possibility both the Sun Belt and the American champions could be the automatic burst into the college football playoff, which is not how it was designed by the Power Four conferences, but that's a real possibility. And to make that playoff would just be an unbelievable thing for a fourth-year FBS program to do.
Yeah, like you mentioned, I don't think the American Conference really, regardless of what happens in that game, is going to affect JMU. When you look at the last polls and having both Tulane and North Texas over JMU, which, I know there were some angry JMU fans that were crunching some numbers with strength of schedule, strength of record, and why North Texas should be there. But regardless, I don't think that really is the game to watch for JMU. It really is that Duke UVA game. And if Duke, pulls out the win, that opens the door for JMU. And obviously there are so many logistics going in. I know some people are very skeptical, and even, Manny Diaz at Duke said that if they win the game that they should be in the college football playoff over JMU, because I think his quote was that it's different day to day in the ACC than the group of five. But I guess he, maybe ignoring those 2 group of 5 losses that his team had this year. But I don't know. I don't think I see a scenario where they put a 5-loss team in the college football playoff, especially when you look at some of those other teams that, aren't winning their conference and won't get a chance at the college football playoff. I think that pretty much does open the door to JMU getting in if Duke wins. That said, even if JMU wins the Sun Belt title tomorrow and UVA wins the ACC to make it into the college football playoff, that still opens the doors for some really awesome bowl games for JMU, in my opinion. I can't lie. I do need to point out, one of the reasons this album is viewable today for anybody watching on YouTube, it's Rumors by Fleetwood Mac, and that's because I looked at a rumored bowl destination for JMU if they were to not make the college football playoff, and it was the Duke's Mayo Bowl. And that was very exciting for me. I think I'm embarrassed to admit it, I did get some happy tears in my eyes because I really want JMU to go to the Duke's Mayo Bowl for selfish reasons, just because it's Duke's Mayo, and I think that's funny. But I think, even kind of going back to my point before I did that tangent, I think a win tomorrow, regardless of if JMU gets into the college football playoff or not, which I know a lot of fans want them to be in it, I think it still opens the door to some really high-profile bowl games that will bring some attention during the holiday season where people are just kind of putting on some football games.
Yeah, and I think we're squeezing this recording in before we go over to the JMU campus for the pre-championship game press conferences with both coaches and Keith Gill. I think it'll be something we can ask Keith Gill about, is the fact that there are some of these bowl games opening up opportunities that are beyond the Sun Belt's typical allotment of bowls, because there's not enough SEC teams. There may not be enough, Big 12 ACC teams. I mean, I think the Big 12 actually did have a lot of teams, but the Power Four is not going to fill all their spots, and that opens up some, like you said, the Duke's Mayo Bowl, some other ones that may allow a team that JMU, even if they're not in the playoff, they're going to be one of the higher ranked teams not in the playoff. That should open up the possibility of a really good bowl game for JMU.
Yeah, so I just want to use this moment, if there is anybody from the Duke's Mayo Bowl, my desk is moving a lot right now, but if anybody from the Duke's Mayo Bowl happens to stumble upon this part of the podcast about 23 minutes in, please send me to the Duke's Mayo Bowl, which would in part mean sending JMU. I had a friend of mine cover the Duke's Mayo Bowl one year, and they gave media members little Duke's Mayo containers with both teams' logos on it. And as a child who was raised by parents who only ate Duke's Mayo, I just selfishly really want to cover that game before I can, if I can't retire from my career. Mind you, I'm only 28, so I have a long career ahead of me, hopefully, but I cannot retire until I cover a Duke's Mayo Bowl, regardless of what team is involved. So honestly, we should just get out of the way this year. Send JMU to the Duke's Mayo Bowl if they don't make the college football playoff. I know our boss is sitting somewhere behind Shane right now. He can't hear it because Shane's headphones, but Cody, if you listen back on this, I'm going to the Duke's Mayo Bowl. I think wasn't Virginia Tech in it last year before?
They have been recently, I believe.
Yeah, I think they've been there since I've been employed at the DNR. And for our listeners, our editor is a Virginia Tech alum, and I was very salty that they went to the Duke's Mayo Bowl and I didn't get to go cover it. But I think without spending too much more time on the Duke's Mayo Bowl because it's getting weird now probably for listeners to hear this. But like you said, we will kind of have those conversations. But even I think back to like the 2023 game where JMU got into the Armed Forces Bowl, that is a pretty big bowl game. Like that's not one to kind of like ignore and bat your eyes at. So any of these games that JMU is kind of finding itself in conversation for now, I know people are going to be disappointed if it's not the college football playoff, but these games are not ones to maybe ignore, and they're not maybe just some of those like bowl games that people brush aside. These are kind of good games that should bring some good opponents if JMU were to find itself there.
Yeah. Before we jump into our discussion of the JMU coaches search, I'll just take the time to tell everybody to please subscribe or like or search out DNR Media on your favorite podcast platforms or on YouTube, wherever you want to listen or watch this. You can check out this show, Postscript. The first episode of that was with me and Catie, where we talk about a story that was in the DNR and like kind of the reporting process and how that all came about. We'll have another episode of that coming up here in the next few days. So please just, check out the whole podcast channel from the Daily News Record. It's called DNR Media. With that, let's talk about, I think, what a lot of people probably wanted to hear about when they clicked on this, and we teased it out.
Definitely wanted to hear about Duke's Mayo.
Teased it out for a long time, but the latest on the JMU coaching search, and as we record this, I'll be honest, I got a phone call that I'm supposed to take like as soon as we get done recording. It may tell us completely new information, but we'll see. But it's
going to make everybody wonder
where we are right now. There's been reports that JMU has kind of at least started to target Billy Napier, the former Florida coach and who won multiple conference championships at Louisiana in the Sun Belt, and Kevin Cahill, who is the coach of the currently undefeated Lehigh Mountain Hawks at the FCS level as they get ready for the FCS quarterfinals. And we can confirm that Matt Rohn and I believe some other JMU administrators were on a plane that returned from the Lehigh Valley International Airport yesterday, which is very close to Lehigh University. That same plane went to Gainesville, Florida, where presumably Billy Napier continues to live after he lost his job at Florida earlier this season. So those are kind of known facts that same plane from Bridgewater made those trips. That plane is owned by Dynamic Aviation, which is a company run by a JMU Board of Visitors member. Those are the known facts. We've talked to an FCS coach who told us they thought JMU would probably take a swing at maybe a big name early on in the process. I think Billy Napier would qualify as that. What are the other bullet points I haven't mentioned yet? As we've both been digging into this, and it seems like the search is well underway.
Definitely well underway from what we've been able to gather. You were at the men's basketball game last night, and before we were able to confirm that Matt Rohn was on that plane last night, you also noticed that he and general manager Cliff Wood were not in their normal seats for that men's basketball game. So that kind of helped us understand where the two of them may possibly have been. So I'm trying to think, what other ones that we've talked about? Obviously, like you said, Billy Napier would be kind of a big time hire. He is being linked to the Tulane job as well. So maybe Florida, Tulane just do a little coaching switcheroo. But he is, I think, definitely someone to keep an eye on with his success in the Sun Belt. Obviously, it was a shaky run for him at Florida in the SEC, but I think he's someone that people are going to like his success just in this conference already. So to see his name float around, I think kind of fits that fits the bill of what you mentioned, what we've heard from an FCS coach of kind of a name that they would maybe target right off the bat before casting a wider net if things didn't work out. But coaching search definitely well underway for a team that technically still has a head coach.
Yeah, like I was going to mention that. Like it's a weird situation, one that we've never really run into before, where the news broke days ago. It was Monday, early afternoon, that multiple national reporters broke the story of Bob Chesney agreeing to become UCLA's coach. We're recording this on Thursday afternoon, roughly about the same time of day that came out. And there's still been no statement by either UCLA or JMU, which it sounds like that was probably the agreed upon deal, was that it wasn't going to be announced until after the Sun Belt Championship game, but the news broke and was leaked somewhere along the way. So it's an odd situation to have the news out there and actually no recognition of it at all 4 days later by either school, especially when it's abundantly clear that JMU has begun their search for the next coach. Like, it's not like, it doesn't seem like there's any chance that Bob Chesney's like still weighing his options and coming back or anything like that. Like, JMU is out there looking for another coach. And I've never really dealt with a search quite like that, where it starts before it's officially like supposed to begin.
Yeah, it's really weird. It's not like last year or 2 seasons ago when Kurt Signetti was very much out the door when the search began. This is everybody's kind of waiting it out. I don't believe that, yeah, like you said, I don't believe that this was supposed to get out before the Sun Belt Championship game. I think it was supposed to come out after. So it is kind of now a watching to see how this administration handles this next search. I think, like you said, well underway. I think I think JMU is kind of narrowed in on some guys early on who they really, really like. And, their coaches, like we've kind of mentioned, that are linked to other, group of 5 jobs. So it will be curious to see how these play out. But yeah, definitely a quick one. They don't have the pressure of the transfer portal opening anytime soon with the new schedule. So I think that's a good thing for JMU. And I honestly will say too, I think another great thing is JMU still managed to get a lot of these high schoolers that were in the signing class signed. There are only a couple that said that they were reopening their commitment. One said that he'll probably still make a decision by tomorrow. So I do think JMU has been trying to get this coaching search done quickly, even though Chesney is still at the university, just because they want to make sure that this class is solidified and they have a head coach in to talk to the current team before the portal opens up at the beginning of January.
Yeah, a couple things about signing day, which you mentioned. They were able to sign like a relatively robust class, like despite really not having a head coach. That kind of flows with some things that we've heard, that maybe there could be some people still on the staff interested in sticking around if that's an option to them. I think we've heard, I will put us not from, Colin Hitchler himself, but I've heard that he is very interested in being considered for that head coaching job. And, honestly, if they're out there trying to start interviews already, we wouldn't necessarily know where he stands because we can't track the flights to see like if they talk to him. That's a matter of walking across the parking lot if you're Matt Roan to do that one. So
yeah. I was going to say, we do not have a GPS monitor on Matt Roan, so we cannot track his movements. I want to make that so crystal clear to people. But I do think we've both heard from maybe a couple different people that Colin Hitchler is interested in the job. And that was something that when we recorded earlier in the week, we weren't sure if he was interested in becoming a head coach or if he was happy being a defensive coordinator. But I think we're both pretty confident now saying that Colin Hitchler does have an interest in this job. And so I think it is going to be interesting to see, maybe it only sticks, or maybe we're only able to track a couple flights because it's, Billy Napier, Lehigh's option, going the Lehigh route, or looking at Colin Hitchler. I think that is one that I think you see there were several guys on the defensive side of the ball that did sign with this next class. And so I think maybe having that option of Hitchler is what kept those guys at JMU. And I don't know, even seeing some of the assistant coaches talk on social media, Coach Harper, who's leading the wide receivers room, was very excited about the wide receivers that signed yesterday. So I think this group right now, I think there maybe is that possibility of Colin Hitchler staying in Harrisonburg as an option at head coach.
Yeah, and one thing that was mentioned to me too is like you look at the entire staff. It seems likely that if Hitchler doesn't get the job, from what I've heard, like probably the coordinators would be wanting to go along with Bob Chesney, probably for very large salaries in the Big Ten. But if you're other maybe lower level assistants, like that is one, like a huge culture change to go from Harrisonburg to Los Angeles. And what does your family think about that? It may cost you're probably getting a raise, but it's probably cost you maybe $2 million to get the same house in Los Angeles that you would get in Harrisonburg. So there's some factors to think about that. Some of those people have lives and spouses and family members who are tied to this area with their jobs and careers and things like that. So I think it'll be kind of a wait and see thing, exactly, what happens with the rest of the staff, what a new coach wants to do as far as like keeping other people on, where he brings all of his own people. So I think it's possible we see some continuity in the program, even if it's not with the head coach. And another factor with that, we talked about this, Catie and I did, like privately, is you've seen some programs where the head coach played a big role in bringing in the general manager to help handle the roster. JMU has done it a little bit differently, where Cliff Wood is a JMU guy through and through. He's doing multiple sports for JMU as a general manager. And so he's not going with Bob Chesney to UCLA, whereas, not to necessarily use North Carolina as like an ideal example, but we do know like that, like North Carolina's a situation where like the coach brought the general manager with him and they had history. So if Bill Belichick goes somewhere, also probably does the general manager. At JMU, like Cliff Wood is probably already working on keeping as much of the roster around as possible with their NIL deals, with the rev sharing and things like that. There's somebody probably actively recruiting the players to stick around, which is a much different situation than it was when Kurt Signetti left 2 years ago.
Yeah, I think that should make JMU fans pretty excited to know that Cliff Wood is most likely still talking with these guys, and there is still that piece where he is going to be in Harrisonburg 6 months from now. Like, he will still be here and talking with these guys. So I think that's definitely something that should be very exciting in comparison to what JMU fans saw 2 years ago with the kind of the mass exodus to Indiana, or even just to the transfer portal. There are going to be some people here still in the ears of some of these players over the next month or so, telling them, hey, we are going to, make sure that the right coach is hired for this position. It is going to be a reload, not a rebuild. So I think that's an exciting thing to see kind of in this era of college football and the NIL, is that, the general manager is connected to the school, not the coach.
And Cliff is also more than likely probably talking to the prospective coaches about who might be interested in sticking around and what that roster might look like next year, which is a head start and a different situation than 2 years ago as well. I think the other thing might be worth mentioning is, the name Jimmy Sexton is coming up in like searches all over the country and jobs all over the country. He is apparently Bob Chesney's agent. He's also Billy Napier's agent. There's reports that UCLA locked in on Chesney basically as soon as they fired Deshaun Foster, like early in the season. I've got to wonder if that's the case. Does a guy like Jimmy Sexton go to a Matt Rowan and say like, hey, look, we both know you're not keeping your guy here. Maybe you should take a look at my other client, Billy Napier, who also happens to be available now. Is that a reason why the search seems to be so far along, like before there's even been an announcement about Bob Chesney?
Yeah, I think that could be it. And I also just think Chesney's name being floated around all season at different jobs as well. I think at this point, I think it would have been silly for Matt Rowan to not be prepared for this. I think just knowing what JMU is and has been with its coaches, I think this is something that, regardless of agents and who is involved, I think Matt Rowan has been kind of ahead of the curve on needing to have a list together of guys that he is interested in and interested in talking to about this opening.
Yeah. And, this is getting a little bit long, so we probably don't have time to go through our entire list of names we talked about that could be possibilities for this. Although it does seems seemingly pretty clear that Napier and Cahill are the first two anyway that JMU has taken a deep look at, and possibly Colin Hitchler. We'll find out about that. But if you want to see more names that we've talked about, go ahead, go to dnronline.com/sports. New article is up where we get into get in depth about all the stuff we've just talked about, plus like some other names that, may make sense. We spent some time curating and trimming and figuring out who we thought really belonged on that one. So it's not just throwing out any name that comes to mind. So I think it's worth taking a look at if you want to go to dnronline.com and read that. That's our last little pitch and plug for this.
Yeah, definitely. We were, working late last night, talking after Shane was done covering the basketball game of what names we wanted on that list. I think there were 3 or 4 different names that ended up having a blurb written that were not in the final edition of that story. So it may be one that, as things continue to take shape, maybe some of those names reappear on the list. But, as of right now, I think the list that we have and we put together had some good names. I think the ones that we've mentioned kind of are the bigger ones of Hitchler, Cahill, and Napier right now are the ones that seem to be getting some traction.
Yeah, and I will say, like, to toot our own horn a little bit, we had Napier and Cahill on the initial list and before we really started getting any inside info. So, maybe we were on the right track with some of it to begin with.
And hopefully here in the next couple of days, we'll be able to talk to Matt Roan and kind of get his idea on, someone like a Hitchler who doesn't have that head coaching experience. Because right now, again, that list was created without any knowledge of kind of what a head coach looks like in the eyes of Matt Roan.
Yeah. So we'll go ahead and wrap this one up. This has been another episode of the Purple and Bold podcast from DNR Media. As always, I'm Shane Metlin here with Catie Harper. We cover JMU sports for the Daily News Record. So follow this podcast, follow everything on dnronline.com here over the coming days, because there's going to be more news than you can handle, probably, whether we'd be talking about coaching searches, potential college football playoff, getting deeper into basketball season and everything else happening at JMU. So be sure to follow us here, and thanks for tuning in.